If there's anyone who doesn't know what Delos is, well, as we've always said, Delos is the vacation of the future today. At Delos, you get your choice of the vacation you want. There's medieval world, Roman world, and of course, Westworld.
Station 3. You're cleared on Vector 79er on a 195.
Did they have much of a kick? A Go 45? Well, I never fired one before. The guns they give you are real guns?
Real gun.
That's incredible.
Stand by. Locking in now.
May I have your name, please?
John Blaine.
Peter Martin.
Thank you.
Was she, probably.
That's amazing.
Supposedly you really can't tell, except by looking at the hand. They haven't perfected the hands yet.
While you are there, please feel free to indulge your every whim. Nothing can go wrong.
You gotta get into the feel of the thing.
I feel silly.
Why? Looks like a joke.
It's not a joke, it's an amusement park. The best amusement park in the world. All you have to do is have fun. That's the beauty of this place.
Your move.
The day we opened the resort, we had a failure and breakdown rate conforming to computer predictions. That is 0.3 malfunctions for each 24-hour activation period, concurrent or not. This was an anticipated operations aspect of the resort, and we were fully able to handle it. Well, despite our corrections, the breakdown rate continued to climb. And there's a clear pattern here which suggests an analogy to an infectious disease process.
I must confess, I find it difficult to believe in a disease of machinery.
We aren't dealing with ordinary machines here. These are highly complicated pieces of equipment, almost as complicated as living organisms.
Pretty realistic, huh?
Listen, are you sure he was,
Of course, you don't really think you shot anybody, do you?
Many elements of the Delos resort are potentially dangerous. That's part of the appeal. If we can't ensure the safety of the guests, we're going to be in desperate trouble.
But we can ensure their safety. Everything's fine.
shot? Oh my God.
Draw.
The summer of 1973, Westworld arrived on the big screen in the USA on the 17th of August, and later throughout the year on the 24th of October, as it received a wider release in the States. It wasn't until the 14th of March 1974 it arrived in the UK. Produced on a limited budget of $1.25 million, it grossed $10 million in the USA, and became the most successful film for MGM that year. Come 1982, it was released on home video and the CED format, and brought in a further $4 million in home rentals. Due to Westworld's popularity, a sequel was released 3 years later, in 1976, called Future World. A failed TV show called Beyond Westworld arrived in 1980, and this year a new series was produced which was a follow-on from the original movie. The sequel and the spin-offs will be discussed later in the video. Writer and director Michael Crichton conceived of the idea for Westworld during the early 70s, when he was interested in astronauts and how machines helped them in the training process, and the animated figures he saw displayed at Disneyland. The idea of making people as machine-like as possible and machines as human as possible created a lot of confusion and intrigue. That's what spurred on the idea of Westworld. He felt it was inevitable that humans would accommodate machines to support their existence. Michael was already a successful writer and had many books published. He had only started using his own name with the book The Andromeda Strain. Beforehand, he was producing many paperback thrillers under different names. When it came time to write Westworld, he felt it didn't work as a novel because of its structure and the particular story he was trying to tell. When the film came out, the novelization was just a screenplay and wasn't an adaptation of the script, and the book hasn't been republished for years. thus resulting in high prices from private sellers. The idea of Westworld and its amusement park theme had many elements for the visitors to live out their movie fantasies, and the park included many cliches with a shoot in a saloon, sword fighting in a medieval world, and the castle banquet hall. It contained imagery played on people's memories of having seen it before. On paper, Michael felt this was a bit strange, so a book wouldn't be suitable, but as a movie it would translate perfectly. He had finished it in August of 1972 and shopped it around to all the major studios, and all of them turned it down apart from MGM. At this point in time, the studio apparently didn't have a good reputation. Many of the big directors had expressed their frustrations working with them and putting up with their demands, such as unreasonable pressure, script changes, inadequate post-production, and constant recutting of the final film. Michael had no choice at this point, and with them being the only studio wanting to invest, he had to accept the difficulties he feared. Michael was assured that he wouldn't encounter any problems in the making of the movie, but MGM demanded script changes on the first day of shooting, and the lead actors were not signed on to the production until 48 hours before shooting began. He was given a budget of about $750,000, but it was increased to over $1 million as the production moved forward, due to script changes and its tight shooting schedule of 30 days. In efforts to keep the budget down, they made use of several MGM soundstages on the MGM backlot, and it was one of the final films to be shot there. They also made use of the Mojave Desert and the gardens at the Harold Lloyd Estate for the Roman world. Michael tried to shoot everything that was needed in order to save time, but did eventually trim a lot out, feeling that the work print was dull and depressing. If you've managed to read the novelisation, Michael Crichton explained a number of the scenes that were removed to keep the movie's energy up and the pace to an acceptable level. The opening was slightly longer, which featured hovercrafts, but he couldn't achieve the effects he wanted. There was a bank robbery, additional dialogue throughout the movie, and more scenes of the robots attacking the guests. The ending was also changed. It originally had a fight between the gunslinger and Peter, and an alternative death scene where the gunslinger is torn apart by a rack. The idea was to show an advanced machine getting destroyed by a simple machine. For the cast of Westworld, we have actor and director Richard Benjamin playing Peter Martin, who is on his first trip to Westworld and doesn't know what to expect, but is excited to live out his fantasy as a cowboy. Richard Benjamin later said he loved making the film, and it was the only chance he got to be in a western. At the time, he had no experience with horse riding, despite saying that he did when he got the part, and had to quickly learn how to ride before shooting. James Brolin, who started acting in the early 60s and is still working steadily today, and who is the father of Josh Brolin, plays John Blaine, which is obviously a play on the name John Wayne. He has been to Westworld before and is taking his good friend Peter along with him. He is very relaxed and cool throughout. He is just there to have fun and doesn't take any of it seriously. It may just be me on this, but James does look a lot like Christian Bale in the movie, and Richard with his moustache resembles Rowan Atkinson from Blackadder. Acting legend of the stage and screen, Yul Brynner plays the gunslinger. Yul was a superstar at this point and was well known for his performances in the box office hits The King and I and The Magnificent Seven. His appearance in Westworld is based on his character Chris Adams from The Magnificent Seven. The costume looks pretty much identical. The gunslinger is part of the amusements. He challenges the customers to duels, but begins to show signs of a grudge against John and Peter. Norman Barthold, who starred in movies such as Close Encounters, Capricorn 1 and Raise the Titanic, plays the medieval knight. He is also a guest at the park and is looking forward to exploring the medieval world. He instantly takes advantage of the pleasures of the park and starts hitting on the Queen straight away. He starts to indulge in his fantasies to the fullest, but sadly becomes the first victim when the robots break their code and begin to kill the guests. Alan Oppenheimer plays the chief supervisor of Westworld. He has been observing the behaviour of the robots and the increased number of breakdowns, and is the first to suggest that a virus may be spreading throughout the park, and feels they may need to shut down the park to contain it, but the rest of the board feels his ideas are ludicrous and wish to keep it open as profits come first. Alan still works to this day despite being in his late 80s, mainly as a voice artist. He provided the voice of Man-at-Arms and Skeletor in the He-Man cartoon, Falkor in Neverending Story, and the past few years on video games such as God of War 2 and Fallout 4. The movie opens in the future of 1983. Oh my god. Peter and John are travelling by plane to the adult amusement park called Delos, which features 3 themed worlds: Medieval World, Roman World and Westworld. For $1,000 per day, guests may indulge in any adventure with the androids, including sexual encounters, ooh la la, and even fight them to the death. There are rules in place for the androids who are virtually indistinguishable from human beings and can only be identified by the palms of their hands, cannot bring serious harm to the customers. Peter and John are joining Westworld and come face to face with the gunslinger, who challenges Peter to a duel. Peter shoots him and is left confused on how real it all seemed. John assures him that it was an android and they can't kill us. Peter later even tries to shoot John as he eggs him on to prove a point. The firearms have heat sensors and won't work pointed at a human, and only work with cold-blooded androids. The robots in Roman and Medieval World begin experiencing an increased number of breakdowns and failures with their interactions with the humans, which the technicians identify as a computer virus, comparing it to an infectious disease that has now spread to Westworld. The malfunctions become more serious when a robotic rattlesnake bites Blaine in Westworld, and an android refuses a guest's advances in Medieval World. Further problems begin to occur at Medieval World as the Black Knight robot kills a guest in a sword fight. The resort's supervisors try to regain control by shutting down power to the entire park. However, the shutdown traps them in central control when the doors automatically lock, sealing them in, and oxygen beginning to reduce as they struggle to turn the power back on. The robots in Roman and Medieval World run amok, killing the guests. John and Peter wake up from a drunken punch-up from the night before and walk into the town of Westworld, and it's completely deserted, and the gunslinger clocks Peter and John. He approaches them for another duel. In 1973, the thought of using digital imagery would seem totally impossible to achieve, but they managed to do it and made Westworld the first feature film to use the technology. But it was no easy feat. Michael wanted to see the visual POV of the androids. He didn't want to use the existing techniques of manipulating photographic elements. He wanted to visualize a mechanical process of how they see. Such a process had never been used for a motion picture before, and none of these special effects houses even knew what he was talking about. Crichton decided to approach the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, but it was told it would take 9 months at the cost of $200,000 to produce 2 minutes of footage. He didn't have the time or money to take their offer. The film needed to be finished in under 6 months. He contacted John Whitney Sr., who in turn recommended his son to help. Michael was informed that they could do it quickly and at a reduced cost. The approximately 2 minutes and 31 seconds worth of cinegraphic blocks was accomplished by colour separating each frame of the source onto 70mm film images, scanning each of those elements to convert into rectangular blocks, then adding basic colour according to the tone values developed. The resulting pixel effect was transferred back to film. It's very impressive for the time and must have blown away audiences with the final results. Today it may seem very crude to some, but this was so ahead of its time, and Michael clearly had a great insight on how computers could be used to our advantage to achieve visual effects. The late composer Fred Karlin composed a score to Westworld. Fred had composed more than 100 scores to feature films and TV movies, and also wrote 3 books on film composition. Westworld has a very unconventional score, but very original for the time. It has the usual Western scoring, but made use of electronic music, which was very contemporary for the time, which gave the film a fresh sound. The soundtrack is kind of a mixed bag for me. The electronic cues are certainly effective and impressive for the early 70s, but the Western music outstays its welcome very quickly in the film, however. It's just your typical Western tunes you find in the genre. It certainly serves the setting and does what it needs to do, but it's far more interesting when the electronic music makes an appearance and has a bigger effect on the tone and narrative as the chaos begins to unfold. The soundtrack was issued on LP when the film was released, and later reissued on LP and tape in 1986. It didn't arrive on CD till 2000. It was expanded with a few more tracks in 2005 as part of a collection by Film Score Monthly, which also featured the music to Coma and the Carey Treatment. The CD releases command high prices, and to be honest, I felt the score is not that good to warrant the high price it demands online. Now, before I discuss my final views on the movie, due to Westworld's success, MGM wanted to pursue with a sequel, which was titled Future World. But during its development stage, MGM backed out to focus on Logan's Run, and instead the sequel was picked up by American International Pictures. The film arrived in 1976 and would have the film set 2 years after the original. The company behind Westworld are trying to correct the mistakes of the past and to restore faith in their company, and have introduced more worlds within the amusement park, such as Spa World and Future World, but Westworld has now been closed. For publicity purposes, newspaper reporter Chuck Browning and TV reporter Tracy Ballard are invited to review the park. Just before visiting the park, he arranges to meet with a Delos employee who promises he has dirt on the corporation. Before the meeting, the tipster is shot in the back and dies after giving Chuck an envelope. The reporters are stunned to find that the control centre is staffed entirely by robots. While they sleep, medical tests are conducted on them so Delos can make clones of them. Future World was the first major feature film to use 3D computer-generated imagery, which was used for animating hands and faces for the monitors as the technicians inspect the robots. Future World wasn't as bad as I was expecting. I read some of the reviews from the time and it was panned by most critics. The story certainly tries to do more than the original. There is definitely more stuff going on, but it's pretty lackluster with its direction. It feels like a TV movie in some regards, and the production design is woefully uninspired. Where are the keyboards? They're just using flashing buttons. In the future we won't need keyboards, just multicoloured buttons that don't indicate anything. It's all very 70s and of its time, and to be honest it feels more dated than the original. The CGI incorporated visuals are certainly impressive. You got to remember this is 1976. Yul Brynner is barely in it unfortunately, just a glorified cameo and has no real reason to be there. There are some interesting ideas in it that did tickle my interest, but it's bogged down with a lot of padding and fluff. It's fundamentally very flawed, but not unwatchable. In 1980, a TV show aired on CBS called Beyond Westworld, which took place after the events of the sequel. It has John Moore, a security chief of the Delos Corporation, trying to stop scientist Simon Quaid, as he plans to use the robots to take over the world. Only 5 episodes were produced, and it was cancelled after the 3rd episode due to poor ratings. The series is available on Region 1 DVD as part of Warner Archives collection. The first episode, Westworld Destroyed, is part of the special features of the Westworld Bluray. I've only seen the first episode and thought it was okay. It wasn't terrible. I have no idea what the viewing figures were at the time to warrant it being cancelled, but only after 3 episodes it must have been really bad. It wasn't until 36 years later that Westworld returned to the small screen. When they announced a new series based on the 1973 film, I was kind of sceptical. I didn't know really what to expect and how they would translate it and expand it into a TV format, so I watched it with no expectations and just went into it with an open mind. The first episode instantly grabbed my attention and I was hooked. I've watched every episode without fail. It's one of the finest programs on TV. It's bloody incredible, amazing cast, beautifully photographed and directed, great story with many twists and turns that will keep you wanting more at the end of each episode. It wonderfully homages and shows respect for the original movie as well. It would be a bit unfair, however, to make comparisons to the 1973 movie and put them side by side because so much has changed in filmmaking over the years. But the TV show has a huge advantage of being a modern production and being in an episodic format, which has huge benefits for its narrative. It does so much more than the film. It's stuffed to the rims with great ideas and expands on the original concept by Michael Crichton. It ends up being leagues ahead of the movie. It's must-watch entertainment. My first awareness of Westworld came in the early days of owning cable TV in the early 90s, with the movie channel TNT, which over the years I believe was replaced with Turner Classic Movies. It was just on as I was flicking through the channels and I stumbled across Westworld. I thought the idea of a theme park attraction turning against its host was a great concept. This was before I saw Jurassic Park, and I didn't really put 2 and 2 together as a kid, but it was a glaring comparison, and just 2 seconds of homework you realise both were written by Michael Crichton. As a kid I was never a huge fan of westerns. I saw so many as a kid on Sunday afternoons starring John Wayne, and they were the same tired formula repeated over and over again. There was of course the spaghetti westerns and the classics with Clint Eastwood, but these movies weren't really given much airtime as far as I was aware, or weren't brought to my attention that much. So come Westworld, if it didn't involve the concept of machines turning against humans, then I wouldn't have given it the time. I'm glad I did give it a chance because it felt like a new twist on the Western genre, with the 70s being dominated by science fiction, thanks to the success of 2001 Space Odyssey, released in 1968. Studios jumped at the chance to capitalise on the genre with movies such as THX 1138, Silent Running, Soylent Green, Planet of the Apes sequels, Death Race, Logan's Run, and the eventual release of Star Wars, which had the biggest impact on cinema and film history. Most of the other sci-fi movies of that decade didn't make much of an impact despite the audience wanting more. Most sci-fi flicks of the 70s showcased a dystopian future, whereas Westworld took things in a slightly different direction, where the future seemed advanced and the people were wealthy and happy, so it appears, and they see the past as a source of entertainment and pleasure. The first thing that grabbed me when revisiting Westworld after many years was the quality of filmmaking. Michael had only directed one TV movie before embarking on his first feature film. He makes fantastic use of the CinemaScope format, which is certainly necessary when shooting a western, but there is great coverage of the sets and the introduction of the new scenes. It felt quite modern for its time. Shots didn't feel overly staged and flat. There was something quite unique about it. There is of course the odd bit of bland coverage and weak set dressing, which is probably a reflection of its limited budget and shooting schedule. What I found puzzling, or say unsure of, was the inclusion of Roman and medieval world. They both seem out of place with the main focus of the narrative and what the movie is trying to sell, especially with how the film was marketed. Everything is focused on the Western setting. You could totally forget there was a Roman world, because there is little coverage of it. You only see Roman world as the robots begin to attack the guests. It seems like an afterthought to use some existing sets. But I think the case may be that Michael Crichton trimmed many of the scenes down to keep a sensible run time, because he had complained that the assembly cut was depressing and dull. I think it would have benefited the movie if it just focused on the Western theme and explored that more instead of the other worlds. This is what makes the new TV show work so well. It has focus and sticks with one theme. How to identify the robots is by checking their hands. Apparently the technicians haven't perfected that yet. If the guests can have sex with the robots, surely they can replicate hands. It seems like an odd choice. You see the gunslinger and one of the women have a shining effect on their eyes, indicating they look a bit metallic, so shouldn't that be the obvious flaw to spot if they are human or not? I'd think eyes would be more difficult to copy than a human hand. When the robots come in for repair, I think the production designer and the special effects team really did a good job in creating the interior workings of the robots and how they speak. I think care and attention has been displayed on camera to give a sense of believability to the androids. The movie starts out well and sets out the groundwork to inform the viewer about what the premise is and introduces the main characters successfully into the story, but when it comes to them entering the park, the movie kind of loses its focus and energy. The second act sort of becomes a bit thin on plot. The park owners discussing the technology inside the robots and concerns about a computer virus is great stuff, but the main characters feel a bit lost. The gunslinger approaches the pair again after Peter shot him when they first encountered him. He appears to come back for revenge. Peter helps his friend John but gets thrown in prison for what he did, and John springs him out. But surely the guests can do what they like. The gunslinger went to attack them, so why should John be punished? Could this situation be part of the park's narrative? But it doesn't make it entirely clear the guests can take part in adventures that are already set up. Its main goal is just to put you in that setting and you can do what you want without being hurt or suffering the consequences. This whole scene didn't really do much for me. It doesn't move the story along, it just comes to a bit of a standstill. It's not really to the third act when the excitement kicks into gear. After a quite long-winded drunken brawl, which has way too many shots in slow motion, John and Peter find the town empty in the morning and are approached, yet again, by the gunslinger. John is suddenly killed and Peter goes on the run. It then turns into a chase movie. This is my favourite part, and despite having little plot as such, it's really tense and exciting on how he is hunted down. When Peter gets into the base of operations, it's wonderfully lit with these never-ending corridors, and with the direction it has this horrible notion that he can't escape. It just becomes a horror movie. You can see James Cameron had some inspiration for these moments, even with how Yul Brynner moves and holds himself on camera. Everything is so precise and efficient. It's not robotic like, say, RoboCop, but as we saw in The Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger moved in a way in which everything is calculated. Yul Brynner, despite having little dialogue and screen time until the third act, does such a good job of his performance and the delivery of his lines. It all seems so effortless for him. He really shines without having to do much at all. Michael Crichton had expressed he was pleased but intimidated by the audience's reaction to the movie. He believed that the film had been misunderstood as a warning of the dangers of technology, but there was a very specific scene where people discuss whether or not to shut down the resort. His real intention was to warn against corporate greed, and not about meddling with technology. The scene of greed from the board members is there, but the focus of machines on what they could do if they broke their code seemed a stronger message than corporate greed. I think if there was more scenes of the board expressing their desires for an increase in profits, then it would have tipped the balance in Michael's favour and what he was commenting on. With the movie being over 43 years old, newcomers or younger audiences may find it very dated or a bit cheesy, which is to be expected with older movies such as this dealing with technology and visions of the future. I think many would laugh at the concepts in Logan's Run, for example. Westworld has its issues. It's not a perfect film. It's problematic with its plot, such as being a bit thin and padded out with scenes that don't really drive the narrative, and random moments of slow motion that in all didn't keep me fully invested until it all kicks off when the androids turn against the humans. But its concept of an amusement park for adults and having robots begin to exhibit a virus and turning against the guests is its selling point and what keeps it seen as a classic piece of cinema. It introduced new ideas and Michael Crichton explored many of them again to greater success in Jurassic Park. Westworld is a good movie and should be applauded and respected for what it was trying to do. It's clearly inspired many filmmakers and writers over the years. It's not perfect, however, but I admire it for its message on greed and the over-reliance in technology. These themes are still important today, making the movie ahead of its time.
Hey! Don't shoot me! Hey, wait a minute! You're a guest. You really gave me a scare. Look, everything's broken down. The machines have gone crazy.
You know about the machines?
Yeah, I repair them. They're running on stored charge out there.
How long can they go?
Some will begin to run down in an hour. Others can go a full 12. Turn the main grid back on.
The relays must be frozen. Can't get back our power.
There's one chasing me now, a gunslinger. Gunslinger. Must be a model 404, maybe a 406. He's got all the sensory equipment. It's a beautiful machine.
He's after me!
I don't doubt it.
What can I do?
There's nothing you can do. If he's after you, he'll get you.
Sir, we have no control over the robots at all.
You haven't got a chance.
There must be something!
Fella, don't kid yourself. There are things you could try. Acid for his visual system.
How are we gonna get out of here? All these doors are electrically powered.
Now get these doors open in here before we all suffocate. No matter what you did, he'll always be one jump ahead of you. You haven't got a chance.
Yes, I do.
Boy, have we got a vacation for you. Vacation for you.
If you enjoyed the video, you can find more on my YouTube channel, and also you can follow me on Twitter. If you want to help support the channel, you can donate through Patreon and receive monthly perks such as updates on the latest news on my channel, early access to reviews and commentaries before they go live on YouTube. Even the smallest donation can help keep this channel going. Thank you.